The Gilded Age. The so-called era of forgettable presidents saw little use of executive power, and rampant corruption plagued the political parties of the era. With the veneer of success stretched thinly over the rapidly growing urban lower class, this was an age of progress and growth, of discrimination and dealings, and most importantly, the subject of Chapter 25 of the White History textbook on the shelf. One of the most significant ways that the Gilded Age saw America grow was in population. During the late 19th century, the number of people living in the states doubled, mostly from European immigrants who sought to escape problems in the Old World and carve out a new life for themselves in America. Despite the seemingly limitless open doors the country left for these newcomers, they met significant resistance from nativists, people who sought to protect the country from these foreigners. Ironically, among the ranks of these xenophobes were immigrants who had arrived only a generation before this sudden deluge of outsiders, seeking to destroy the path that they had taken only decades ago. Eventually, nativists sought to use congressional means to bolt the gates shut. The first to be excluded were criminals and paupers. Eventually, in 1882, the sentiment would culminate when incoming Chinese immigrants, of which over 250,000 had come to America already, were entirely banned in the Chinese Exclusion Act. However, the new immigrants were not without a champion that would fight for them. Enter political machines, which would help give newcomers a foundation on which they could stand and start to build their lives, for the low, low price of their votes in upcoming elections. Corrupt to the very core, the most notorious of these systems was centered at Tammany Hall in the very heart of immigrant activity, New York City. Political machines, leveraging the votes of the millions of immigrants flowing into the country, then put their political stranglehold to work to enrich those at the top of their systems through shady dealings with the government.
The arrival of these immigrants to America's shores triggered a huge boom in the population of its cities. By 1890, cities like New York, Philadelphia, and Chicago boasted a population of well over 1 million. Amenities such as electricity, phone lines, and indoor plumbing attracted millions to its illustrious cities, and the rapid construction of high-rise buildings and transportation provided homes and travel for these new arrivals. However, city life wasn't all glitz and glamour. Crime and cleanliness were a constant plague on the cities, with weak police and a horrible stench. These problems peaked in the slums, which had tenements that packed people into buildings like sardines, with no private restrooms and most rooms not even having access to natural light or fresh air, festering diseases. Unsurprisingly, nobody liked the conditions, and they acted as a great motivator for people to try and get out. Many were successful, much more than there used to be, but ultimately the trappings of city life created more wealth inequality than it resolved. Despite cities' best efforts to cover up the conditions of the poorer communities, the problems there soon attracted the attention of American Protestants who wanted the church to play a more influential role in politics. Social service organizations, including the Salvation Army and the YMCA, were formed and did a lot of good, establishing and running soup kitchens as well as using their missions as orphanages. Meanwhile, the influx of immigrants brought the Roman Catholic Church to America, which used its liberal leanings to assist in the workers' movements. However, in this modern era, a new challenger approached on the religious scene who created a split: Charles Darwin. His theory of natural evolution went exactly against the word of the Bible. At first, his ideas were ridiculed by the scientific and religious communities alike, but as more natural scientists accepted the logic of his theory, there was a split in the religious community, with most going along with science and trying to reconcile the word of Bible with the scientific process. This reconciliation of ideas managed to keep Americans in church, but Darwin's ideas instilled skepticism amongst educated churchgoers and weakened the grip of religion on the daily lives of Americans.
Darwin wasn't the only person defying the established order of society. Women at this point were advocating for more rights, such as Jane Addams, the creator of one of the first settlement homes, places for immigrants and impoverished Americans to get help. In addition, over 1 million women in urban areas had jobs, although they were limited, with workplaces restricting access to certain positions and only hiring unmarried women. Despite these limited work opportunities, women overall had more freedom, as seen through the rise of divorce rates. This all led to an overall culture of sociable women going to clubs after work and exercising their freedoms. More socially active than ever before, women campaigned for the ability to vote, forming organizations such as the National American Women's Suffrage Association. In addition, many primary schools and colleges were created during this time, although access to education was limited for non-white women. However, there were efforts to change this. For example, there were 2 approaches to African American education advocacy: accommodationalists who played into stereotypes and discrimination to achieve their goals, or the ones who promoted for social equity. Women received education from settlement houses. Congress also helped with education, passing bills like the Morrill Act and the Hatch Act, creating land-grant colleges which were funded by the proceeds from the land grants from the government. Alternatively, many private colleges were set up, funded by rich businessmen. Overall, the increasing amount of education caused the illiteracy rate to drop from 20% to 11.9%. This in turn led to an increase in the number of libraries in the U.S., the most notable of which was the Library of Congress. Authors flourished during this time, such as Mark Twain, the person who coined the term Gilded Age.
And with that, we come to the end of this little micro-documentary about the Gilded Age, an era of progress, growth, and corruption. an era where those at the bottom of the ladder found themselves arriving on the shores of a world of giants, fighting to build their lives from the ground up and earn their place in the new urban world. An era of new ideas flourishing as the old dogma gave way to progress. And of course, an era that is the subject of the 25th chapter of the American Pageant textbook on the shelf.